Okay, welcome to the second edition of the MLB redraft. First video was the AL East. So we kind of went through that. I went through the Yankees, Red Sox, Orioles, Blue Jays, Rays. The second one, we're just kind of making our way across the country now. We're going to kind of take a deeper look at the AL Central. So the teams that are going to be there are, we got the Twins, we got the Cleveland baseball team. We got the Chicago White Sox, Kansas City Royals, and the Detroit Tigers. So arguably one of the most boring divisions, in my opinion. I think there's just something about the Central, just in general. I think it's the AL and the NL that is just kind of like, it just feels very talentless. And I think that's just kind of because the past few years, the Royals have been atrocious. The White Sox have been pretty bad, minus last year. And the Tigers have just kind of been a dumpster fire for a few years now. The Indians just don't, the Cleveland baseball team just don't really feel like they try half the time. So we're left with the Minnesota Twins, which are one of the least exciting good teams in baseball. So, we're going to dive into them though. Nick, you said it right though. This is a very interesting division, just in terms of the talent that they have up and down the roster.
Yeah, you said, this isn't the sexiest division for a lot of reasons. When you think of the Central, the Royals had a couple World Series appearances and a championship. They've been mostly terrible outside of that. The Tigers haven't been good for the better part of a decade. The White Sox are just now starting to make things interesting. I think they're the most interesting team in this division by far, and we'll get to that. But the two teams who have really been atop the Central the past 5 or 10 years have been the Twins, who refuse to win a playoff game, and the Indians, who have been on the precipice of a World Series, but anytime they have somebody who's ready to get remotely paid, they trade them away. So the division as a whole is boringly interesting, I guess, is the best way to put it. So I think this should make for some pretty good discussion, because I think that, a lot of these teams, it was tough for me to get down to 3 guys for sure.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll kind of start like we said in the first video. The way we're going to do it is based on how the teams finished in 2020. So the Twins are going to go first, and the Tigers are going to go last. Kind of going down in the division based on how they placed. So first, the Minnesota Twins, the Yankees are the kryptonite of the New York Yankees. Or I think I have that reversed. The Yankees are the Twins' kryptonite. Yeah. I have my Superman. I never watched Superman, so I had that all mixed up. So my first pick for the Twins. Again, just kind of run over the rules again. Only get 3. It's based on years of control. We definitely are playing that into a factor, and obviously we want to worry about value. So the first guy I want is Jose Berrios. He's only 26, 2-time All-Star. I think he has some of the best stuff in baseball. It does remind me a lot, his pitching, his style, to where he comes from, kind of like 3/4. His really good wipeout slider, good fastball. It reminds me a lot of Jose Fernandez, when he was at his peak, in terms of his just overall ability. And I don't think Berrios has reached his highest level of, or reached his potential yet. So he kind of hovers around like the 4 ERA area in terms of his career. He's pitched better. He's had like 3.3, I think, 3.6, 3.8. He's kind of hovered around that area, consistently kind of going back and forth. A lot of strikeouts. He's only 26 though, and I think his best is still ahead of him, so I'm keeping him. He's my ace that I got locked in for the next few years.
Okay, so Berrios is a guy that I'm actually still considering. He's not a lock for my list. It is easy to forget that he's only 26. I think if you're going to look at taking a pitcher for the Twins, he's probably the guy. Kenta Maeda, not enough control for me to really consider putting on a list like this. My number 1 was Royce Lewis, shortstop prospect for them. Their number 1 prospect. Got an ETA this year, very controllable. There's no one that's blocking him that makes me think, oh, they really don't need this shortstop. I think Jorge Polanco is a nice player, but he's not someone that you're going to block a Royce Lewis for. Same goes for Luis Arraez at second. So I think looking at this list, and the Twins actually kind of surprised me in that I actually really do like their roster, like playoff jokes aside. I was low-key worried going into that Yankee series in 2019 just because I think this team can absolutely mash the baseball, and they have a couple pitchers who are better than people give them credit for. But of those people, there's no one that I'm looking at the Major League roster like, need to keep this guy 1,000%. So Royce Lewis is my number 1, just because that kind of potential, I'll hold on to him.
Yeah. So actually, Royce Lewis was my number 2. I mean, number one prospect, former number one overall pick. He was the Arizona Fall League MVP. He's a shortstop, but he does have the ability to play multiple positions. If for some reason you wanted to hold on to Jorge Polanco, you could kind of do like what you did with Glaber, move him to second base. Maybe they have a hole at third base, So he's got ability to play, multiple infield positions if needed. Obviously, shortstop, you want to keep him there, but let's say you wanted to hold on to Polanco a little longer, you could if you wanted to, that kind of see how that plays out. But he's got a quick bat, he's a speedster, good range. So he was my number two, and I think he's the most important player for the Twins to hold on to in terms of long term. But I love Berrios. I'm a huge Berrios guy, so I'm definitely locking him in as my number one, and then Royce Lewis as my number two.
Right.
So who's your number two?
Here's where things start to get tricky for me because Royce Lewis was the only one I looked at and thought he was definitely a lock. So I'm kind of thinking as I go here, I got a group of 3 or 4 guys that I'm trying to pick from. I'm going to go Miguel Sano as my number 2. I know this is a guy, he's had a very up and down career. We've seen him in home run derbies. He made the All-Star in 2017. He had a very bad 2020. Obviously, I think we've been on the same page, discounting somewhat the 60-game season because if you really look at it, it's a season in a lot of people's eyes, but at the end of the day, that's a bad month and a half, which you can easily make up from it. It's the equivalent of a guy, going into June having a down year, and he has 4 months left to figure that out. So, he's 27, going to be 28. I think he's got a lot of promise. The last full season we saw this guy play, he had 34 home runs and had a 923 OPS. So no one else that I would think I need to keep over this guy. So I'll take the guy who I've seen produce at a high level in the major leagues, and I'll keep Miguel Sano.
Yeah, Sano reminds me or makes me think like he's going to have 1 year, like at some point over his career where it's like, wow, this guy could be the best third baseman in baseball. You know what I mean? Like we're like, he's going to have 1 year where he just absolutely mashes, where he hits like 320, like OBP, like 400. He's going to hit like 45 home runs, have like 130 RBIs. It's just like an MVP type season. And you're going to be like, great, he's arrived. And then he's going to fall off because I feel like he's very inconsistent. And I don't know. There's something about him that just doesn't attract me as opposed to the other guys that I have on the list. So he's your number 2. I got my first 2 established. My number 3, and I feel like this is where the Twins really fall off, where there's talented guys, but no one where I'm like, I want to keep this guy. So the first one that I'll kind of start with the prospect and then kind of work out the names that people know a little bit more. I really like their number 5 prospect, Jordan Balazovich. He's a strike-throwing sinker baller, and I do think that that's something that is not as common in MLB. Someone who's you see with Zach Britton and the success that he's had. This guy does it in more of a starter form. And the last guy we really saw do that with a lot of consistency in as a starter was Brandon Webb. If you remember him from like 2006, that guy was a Cy Young candidate. And I think that because he had that sinker ball and he was able to get it for strikes, he's obviously a huge ground ball pitcher, and then once you develop 1 or 2 other pitches, you really, you really kind of become an ace. And this guy apparently has that talent to do that, but there's a lot of other factors. I mean, there's a reason why he's the number 5 prospect, not the number 2 prospect. If he was actually going to be Brandon Webb, he would be at number 2 right behind Royce Lewis. So I couldn't lock him in there. I like the potential. I wanted to mention him, but I don't think that he's actually going to become that. He just has that maybe potential, one day maybe he becomes that. So then it became between Byron Buxton and Max Kepler. Or Kepler, I'm sorry. I was thinking of Jordan Klepper. Max Kepler and Byron Buxton. And Buxton doesn't really impress me. He's supposed to be this, speed guy, defensive, wizard, but he's always hurt. And if you're going to be always hurt, you got to be Ken Griffey Jr. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to be someone who's flying in the walls, getting hurt on time because you're making these defensive amazing plays, when you come back, you got to be an offensive stud. And he hasn't been that. He hasn't even been the speedster that he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be stealing 40 bases a year. I think his max is like 29, and I passed that. He thinks he was at like 16. So he's also been in the league for 6 years. I didn't realize that he's been in the league since he's 21. I feel like everyone's like, oh, this is Buxton's year. he's been here for 6 years. I mean, at some point, I don't think he's going to figure it out. It reminds me a lot of the Billy Hamilton experiment, where it just like didn't work out with the Reds. They went with the speedster, just good defensively because he's fast. And then he's just kind of, at some point, they're like, okay, this isn't working. The guy can't hit. And I think that same thing is going to happen with Buxton, which is why my third one is Max Kepler. He's good. He's not great. But I think we've kind of seen him have a potential for a high ceiling. Potentially like a 30 home run, 90 RBI guy that the Twins park is tough for a hitter. But I think that he's a talented hitter. So, I mean, he was my third, but I'm not excited about it, if that makes sense.
Right. So I'm between three guys. Max Kepler, he's a nice player. To me, nothing excites him. I've always been pissed off ever since there was the one graphic, I think it was like Fox Sports Midwest, compared like him to Aaron Judge, which was the most ridiculous thing that I've maybe ever seen. So I'm not even considering that guy. Buxton's another guy I thought of. He's an absolute wizard defensively. He is ridiculous in the outfield, like a Jackie Bradley Jr. kind of player out there. But you're right, he has been in the league for 6 years, and he's started to improve a little bit. Got his OPS up to 844 in 2020, which is definitely a lot better than what he had been doing. But he's injury prone. He hasn't 100% figured it out, and he's been in the league for 6 years. How much more is he going to figure it out? What is this guy's ceiling? So I'm out on him. Alex Kiriloff was another guy. He's like their number 2 prospect. But just from reading up on him, it doesn't look like he has all that high of a ceiling. He made his debut in the wild card series last year. In game 2, he's a corner outfielder, said, he makes contact well, has power. His power numbers aren't bad, but his AA numbers don't really jump off the page at me. And he was drafted in 2016, so it's not like this guy is some can't miss prospect. So I'm going to go with your first pick. I'm going to throw Berrios on my list just because even though I'm not in love with him, I do think he has more potential than any other pitcher the Twins have. And you said at this spot, you're not getting someone sexy here. So I think that to go with a pitcher is their best move.
Yeah, and I know you're not as high on Berrios, but I do think that he has Cy Young potential. So I don't think that that's a bad guy at that number 3 spot. I just don't think the Twins have 3 exciting guys they really want to hold on to. So, I mean, if you got to throw a potential Cy Young guy there, that's not too bad.
Mm-hmm.
So mine were, just to recap, Berrios, we got Royce Lewis, and we got Max Kepler. That was for me. What were your 3 again?
I did Lewis, Sano, and Berrios.
All right. So moving over to the Cleveland baseball team. I mean, I think the first one is pretty self-explanatory here. I'm going to Shane Bieber. I mean, Cy Young winner, top 3 pitcher in baseball. It would be very hard for someone to argue against him being top 3, in my opinion. And he's only 25. So, I mean, the sky's literally the limit with this guy.
Yeah, I'll save you the debate. He just won a Cy Young. He was dominant. He has 4 cheap years of control left. He's a guy that the Indians are going to keep for 2 years and then trade. But, yeah, he's perfect for them.
Yeah, perfect. They don't have to pay him ever. Get your years with him and get rid of him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So my second one, I do think that this is kind of the obvious second pick as well. But I'm going Jose Ramirez. I really do think he's the quietest superstar in baseball. People forget about him for some reason. I think it's because the baseball team has consistently kind of been a pitching first team, and then the other superstar has been Lindor. So this is now Ramirez's lineup, and I do think that he can really anchor that. He can be a solid 2-3 guy. He's an extra base hit machine. He's probably going to bat over 300 for you when he's at his best. Good eye, going to have a high OBP. So I think he's my number 2. That's a lock.
Yeah, Ramirez is my number 2 too. I thought he deserved the AL MVP in 2020. The dude was unbelievable. And that was in a lineup in Cleveland where he was clearly the guy. And I know that Lindor was there. He had a down 2020, and Ramirez still put up like a nearly 1,000 OPS. He's very underrated, like you said, I think for a lot of reasons. I think he was somewhat in Lindor's shadow. I think Cleveland doesn't get a ton of shine in general. And if you look at third base, that might be the deepest position in Major League Baseball right now. There's a ton of studs. So he's not as sexy as an Arenado, a Machado, even a Chapman, but Jose Ramirez is right up there with all the best third basemen in baseball. So I think he's a guy He's got 3 more years of control left, signed a super team-friendly deal. So, yeah, Jose Ramirez. And he's better defensively than people give him credit for, too. I think he's deceptively good over a third. So he is an absolute superstar, a year in, year out MVP candidate. So he's another guy I think you have to keep.
Yeah, so I mean, I think those two are pretty easy. And then past this, I kind of had a little difficulty with this because every part of me wanted to go hitting prospect here. More for the fact that the Indians, like we say this a lot, they literally breed good pitching.
Mm-hmm.
You got Clevenger, you got Bieber, you got Bauer, all these people that have just been extremely successful, Kluber. So like, I was like, okay, let me try to kind of focus away from it. And I was taking a look at their number 1 overall prospect, Nolan Jones. And I liked him. I do. I think he's going to be good. And I wouldn't hit on anyone for taking him. But the more I looked at Tristan Mckenzie, he's their number 4 overall prospect, or number 3. I couldn't not take him. So he's my third one. He's got 4 pitches. 2 of them are plus. Apparently he's like a really, really smart pitcher. Like he understands the zone. And he just kind of reminds me of like this baseball's version of KD, where he's just like really skinny, but he's just going to blow you away with his ability. And as much as I wanted to go hitting prospect like Nolan Jones, their number 1, McKenzie's too good to me. He's literally just too good. He has too much talent, too many pitches, and too much knowledge of the game from what everyone has said about him to let him go. I mean, he's potentially another number 1 guy that the Indians are going to have, or the baseball team is going to have.
Right. So
he's my number 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually considered both those guys you just talked about. Nolan Jones, definitely an exciting prospect. And I very nearly went with McKenzie. I think he's going to be a stud. I think it's just a perfect example of every time Cleveland trades a pitcher. Last year it was Clevenger. I think it always ends up being a question of who's going to fill the hole in the rotation. And it's just always a stud. So Tristan McKenzie's up there. But I looked into it a little bit closer. I got to go Zach Plesac. We've seen him at the major league level. He's already showed flashes of dominance. He had only 8 starts this year, 2.28 ERA. He had a 3.81 in 21 starts the year before. So I think he's a guy that has a high ceiling. He's going to be 26. He's got 5 years of control left. And like I just said, I had almost a different thought process when I was picking Cleveland, because for other teams, if it's like the Yankees, the Red Sox, even the Twins, maybe they'll lock up their guy that becomes a superstar. I have no confidence in the Indians keeping anybody around. Like even Bieber and Ramirez, those 2 guys, like, yeah, they give them the best chance to compete now, but they also give them the best chance to recoup a great package. Like people forget the Indians' biggest contract they've ever given out was $60 million to Edwin Encarnacion. Like think of any great player that's ever been Indian, whether it's CC, Manny Ramirez, Cliff Lee, any of these guys, Lindor now. They all get traded eventually. So I'm picking these guys to trade them. And you talk about a 26-year-old starter who already right now has the upside of a number 2 guy with 5 years of control left. You could get a king's ransom for him. So I'm going Zach Plesac.
Yeah, good pick. I thought about Plesac too, but I'm a big Tristan McKenzie guy. So
yeah, no, he's great.
Yeah, good pick. And I think now we're moving on to maybe the most difficult to do, just because they are too talented. They're kind of the anti-AL Central in the fact that every player on this team is exciting. We're talking about the Chicago White Sox. I mean, you go down this list of people, and it's just like, oh, this guy's a stud. This guy's a stud. Like Louise Robert, Lucas Giolito, Yohan Moncada, Jimenez, Grandal, Tim Anderson, Jose Abreu, Crochet, Kopech. The list literally goes on and on and on of guys that are just otherworldly talented, who would probably be the third or even second guy on maybe some of these other AL Central teams, minus the baseball team because they got their top 2. But he would probably be maybe a number 3 there. So, I mean, this team is just wildly talented all around, and it was really hard for me to dwindle down. But Nick, who was your first guy?
Yeah, so you said it. Of all the teams we've done so far, this has easily been the longest list of guys that I was looking at. They have the number 14 prospect in baseball on Andrew Vaughn. He was the number 3 pick in 2019. I didn't even look at him. He's not even in consideration for me. Yeah. So that's pretty crazy to say. My number 1 guy, so I've been looking at this whole process as if there's a pitcher who I believe can be a true ace who has multiple years of control left, you keep him. That's why my number 1 was a no-brainer, Lucas Giolito. This guy is a stud. He's right on the cusp of becoming a top 10 pitcher in all of baseball. Threw a no-hitter last year. I think he's going to end up being year in, year out Cy Young candidate. Got 3 years of control left for the White Sox. He's a guy that you could end up going to a World Series with and anchoring your rotation, I think. So Lucas Giolito got to be my number one.
Yeah, he was my number one too, actually, in my pretty much the same thought process. And honestly, it was the fact that the White Sox have so many other talented hitters that I'm like, I gotta lock this guy up first, number one. I do think he has potential to be a top 5 pitcher. You could argue, I mean, I don't think so right now, but you could argue he already is. I definitely think he's top 10. So I mean, he's my number one lock. I mean, I think that he has Cy Young potential every single season.
For sure.
Yeah.
So then, like you just said, number 2, I'm kind of done with pitchers from here on out. I know you mentioned Michael Kopech. I hate that guy. He's so overhyped. All I've seen of this guy is him throwing into that like high velocity machine where you're like throwing into a net from like 2 feet away from it, and he threw like 110 on that. Dumbest shit I've ever seen. I remember before he made his major league debut like 2 or 3 years ago, ESPN did like a piece on him, and they ended it with like, what do you want to be known as? He was like, Michael Kopech like is a Hall of Famer before he ever threw a pitch. Like all he's done is get popped for drugs. He missed 2020. Yeah, I get he throws hard. He has potential. Fuck all the way out of here with Michael Kopech. So I went to the hitters, and there's a ton of guys in this pool, but to me, one guy stands above everyone else just in terms of potential, and that's Louise Robert. This guy is an absolute freak athletically, great defensively in center field. He's got the arm. You know, he's big. He's got power. He runs fast. So he had a disappointing end to 2020. The way it looked in the beginning was like he's a shoo-in for Rookie of the Year. But I'm going to have to give it to him. I think this guy has all the physical tools to be a freak athlete, 5-tool player, multiple-time All-Star. So I'm going with him.
Yeah, everything you say about Michael Kopech is correct. He literally just has a fastball, and guess what? So does everyone else in the MLB now. So you're not that special anymore, Michael Kopech. I left him off my list. Still crazy talented, cool. You throw 103, awesome, whatever. See ya. You're not on this list. My number 2, and it pained me so much to leave Robert off. I did actually. My number 2 on this list was Eloy Jimenez. I think he's the power man in that lineup. I don't know if I think I was at this game with you, Nick, but I remember the Yankees playing the White Sox and Eloy Jimenez hitting a ball that if it didn't hit the back of like the screen in center field, it probably could have. It looked like it was going like 570 feet, and he did that. It was just like one of those like effortless swings. It was like that. Like it was the most simple power I could ever seen. You've also already seen him be successful. It's not like he came up and struggled and, he's like someone, he's got all this power. He's going to figure it out. Don't worry. He's already kind of figured it out. And the guy's like 24 years old. Mm-hmm. So he was my number 2. And the fact that I saw it in person, a lot of these AL Central teams we haven't seen, like actually like watch them be like great. Like I haven't really seen in person Jose Ramirez's, tangibles, like what he really can do. I saw that home run and I'm like, I think that guy is going to be the greatest player I've ever seen. So I mean, yeah, it's an exaggeration, but like guy mashes baseballs. So he was my number 2.
Did he hit 2 home runs that game, or am I not? Because I remember that game ended with it was pissing rain and Chad Green gave up back-to-back home runs. I'm pretty sure he went Oppo Taco to the short porch.
He went Oppo Taco, and then the home run that I'm talking about was just an absolute rocket. It was 150 miles off the bat. I don't care if it wasn't. It was.
Right. So for my 3rd spot, I was originally going to go Tim Anderson and subscribe to the great teams are built up the middle philosophy and have a center fielder and a shortstop. Then I started looking into it further. As much as I like Tim Anderson, I couldn't not go with Eloy Jimenez. So you said it. He's already in his age 22 and 23 seasons posting an OPS 828, 891. He's already put it together. He was a top prospect. He was the big return in the Jose Quintana deal with the Cubs, which is pretty crazy to look back on. He's 24, and yeah, he's a corner outfielder, but he is a guy who can hit in the middle of your lineup for the next decade plus. So for that reason, I got to go with him.
Yeah. And again, it pained me to leave him off, but my 3rd guy was Tim Anderson. And mostly for the fact that I know people don't really care as much about batting average, and I don't really care about it as much in terms of the stat perspective, in terms of how you rank a player. But I do think it's important to have somebody that is going to bat that 320, 330, just because it just keeps the lineup flowing, especially a really powerful one like this. So I went with Tim Anderson just because I think he's an annual potential batting champ guy. Like he's already done it. I think he won once. I think he came in second last year. Oh no, the other way around. He won it last year, came in second the year before.
No, you had it right. You had it right.
Okay, I thought
he won it in 2019.
Okay, so I had it right. My bad. But regardless, he's in that 330 range every single season. And I don't know. I also think that he's just kind of. I said it about one of the guys in the other video. I do think he's just kind of the brand of the White Sox right now. He's kind of like their franchise player, even if there are guys potentially better than him. So I had to take him. Leaving Robert off was really, really hard, though. I do think he's going to be one of the most talented players in baseball for years coming. But I mean, it just speaks volumes to the talent that the White Sox have, that it was tough to choose just three guys.
Yeah, no, and it was hard for me to leave off Anderson. I mean, we didn't even mention Yo Makata, who, I think he's been underwhelming at this point in his career, especially relative to other third basemen, how he said that's such a deep position. But he was number one prospect in baseball at some point, and he certainly hasn't been bad early on in his career. He's still got a ton of potential. Nick Madrigal is another guy who we're going to see this year, I think has a lot of potential. So this is a deep, young roster. I think they have the nucleus in place where they could compete for a long time. And in a lot of ways, it almost reminds me of the 2017 Yankees, where everyone was just coming up at the same time, and we saw a lot of guys have instant success. So if they could build a pitching staff around G Alito, as they're attempting to do right now, they've got a good shot in these next couple of years for sure.
Yeah. You can definitely make the argument that they're the best team in baseball, best team in the AL, kind of paired up right with the Yankees.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so moving on, a team that's definitely fell off since their really exciting 2015 World Series, the Kansas City Royals. I remember watching that team, when they played the Mets, and it was just like, wow, these guys are going to be good. This guy, they got all the pieces. That it seemed like they kind of were falling into place to be like this, almost like kind of what the Rays are, just kind of low budget, but really exciting and talented young team. And, we just kind of haven't really seen much from them since. So a guy who really wasn't part of that team was, and someone who I'm taking now, is Whit Merrifield. Like I said before, one of the few consistent 300 guys left in baseball. He also has 30-plus stolen bases potential. I do think he's just the most talented player on their roster right now, so he was my lock for number one.
Right. So Whit Merrifield I actually thought was going to end up being my lock. He's a very complete player, super versatile. He's only making like $4 million a year, really team-friendly contract, but he is 32, so I don't think that there's any combination of two more guys to put him with that make his timeline line up. Like, I think the other guys you have to pick by the time they're productive MLB players, I think you're looking at Merrifield in his mid to late 30s. So I actually left him off my list. My number one guy was Bobby Witt Jr., number 7 prospect in all of baseball. He's a shortstop. It looks like he's a complete player. They gave him on the 20 to 80 scale. He's a 60 all around, so he should be good defensively. He can hit the ball. Number 2 pick in 2019. Says we might see him as early as next year. So I think he's a guy that I had to keep.
Yeah, my argument for the fact that Witt's 32 is kind of the same argument that a lot of people made with DJ this past offseason, in the fact that these guys who hit for average, not that it doesn't matter how old they are, but they're not going to decline as fast as you might think. Like, you could see someone be successful until they're age 36, 37, 38 season. Obviously not in the way that Barry Bonds was when he was juicing. But, you could still see him hitting that 290, 300 range, regardless of how old he is, because it's just bat the ball. As long as he doesn't lose any strength, he might not steal as many bases, but he could still be really successful. And that's why I was good with leaving him as my number one, because I do think he's the most talented player there. But my number 2 was definitely Bobby Witt Jr., number 7 overall prospect in baseball, like you said. And it seemed like Adley Rutschman, the catcher that the Orioles took in 2019, was the consensus number 1 overall pick. But from everything that I read, this guy was 1A. And from when you got like that, like high, like Adley was like, okay, this guy's obviously the number one pick. When you got like it's like right behind him, like I feel like his talent level is just because he was number 2 doesn't mean he's that much less than what Adley is. So I mean, he could have been a number 1 pick had Adley not been there. Is what I'm trying to say. So a good combo of power and speed at shortstop, which seems to be the trend for success as MLB and baseball itself just kind of changes. So he's definitely my number 2 there. I'm in agreement with you on him, keeping on the list.
Right. So my second and third guys kind of all go together because I had a tough decision to make. So I originally wanted to go one pitcher and one hitter. So the 2 hitters I was looking at, Andrew Benintendi, who they just acquired from the Red Sox. He's still young. He's 26. He's still controllable, still cheap. And I think this guy has a ton of potential. For whatever reason, he fell out of favor in Boston with Chaim Bloom and the new front office group. But this was a guy who, when he came up in 2017 and in 2018 as well, he killed the Yankees with that lefty swing. I think this guy can hit. He's a stud. He's pretty good defensively in the corner outfield. So I do like him a lot. Jorge Soler was another guy I looked at. He's still relatively young. He's 28. He hit 48 home runs as recently as 2019. So I like both those guys. But then I went to picking a pitcher, and I can't choose between their top 2 pitching prospects, Daniel Lynch, who was their number 1 pick, I believe, in 2018, and then Asa Lacy, who was their first-round pick in 2020. They're both tall lefties, throw 97 plus. Could see Lynch as early as 2021, Lacy as early as 2022. I just couldn't pick between both those guys, so I figure – I already have Whit there. He's very young. I'm just going to take both those pitchers and roll with that. So that's my 3, Whit, Lynch, and Lacy.
Yeah. Not bad. I did look at Lacy too. Just something about him didn't really stand out to me. So I went with Benintendi for my number 3rd one. More for the fact that I feel like he kind of might have a chip on his shoulder right now. The team that was once so high on him, the city of Boston that was once really high on him, I feel like the fans weren't really all in on trading Benintendi, but like a lot of them understood it. So I feel like a team that was once so high on him kind of was just like, all right, like it is what it is, see ya type thing. And I feel like that's going to kind of help him realize his potential in Kansas City. He reminds me of what like Alex Gordon was at his peak. And I've just made that comparison just because it was the Royals in both situations. But a good defensive left fielder. I think Benintendi could be great. He has good instincts, not necessarily the speed, but he definitely gets a good jump on the ball. And I do think that he has potential to be a really, really like highly touted, like top end left fielder. So he was my 3rd pick, but Lacy just didn't really do it for me. There was something about him. I just kind of, the more I read his scouting report, the more I just wasn't intrigued at him as much as I was with Benintendi. So I went Benintendi. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So then you went, that's your 3. So you're good there. We'll move on to the team that I don't think has been relevant in like 10 years. It feels like it's been a while since the last time the Detroit Tigers were like a team that felt like they were like actually in baseball. Like when I think of like the Tigers, I still think of like Jim Leland. You know what I mean? Like those years, like way back when they had Verlander, when they had Scherzer, and it just feels like they haven't really been relevant in a long time. But I do think that with the talent they have, and I didn't pick any Major League Baseball players here. If you want to count Mize as one because he had a rookie season, you can, but I still consider him a prospect.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go with any pro players right now. So my number 1 was someone who actually jumped Casey Mize as number 1 overall prospect, is Spencer Torkelson, number 3 overall. And this is something I read that I thought was crazy. His first year at Arizona State, everyone thought he'd be someone that was one of the best freshman bats in the country. His 25 home runs obliterated Barry Bonds' school record for freshmen and fell too shy of the mark for any player. He's performed well for USA Baseball, for the Cape Cod League, to the best, young spots you can find. And he's the first corner infielder taken in 22 years. So that's almost like like a wide receiver being taken number one overall. Like it's just not as common. Or Saquon being taken at number 2. It's like almost like that skill position aspect where it's like, okay, we're taking this guy because of his bat, and this guy can fucking hit. He's the number 3 overall prospect in baseball. But I mean, this guy is supposed to be like a whirlwind of talent, so he's my number 1.
Yeah, no, he's my number 1 too. I actually, my eyes popped out of my head when I read that. Like, if you are doing something better than Barry Bonds as a freshman in college, you're doing something right. And we've obviously been reading through these the whole time. With teams like the Tigers, you're not looking at their major league roster really. You are trying to see who in that pipeline you want to keep around. And, we've been mentioning top prospects, and you look at the 2080 grades, you don't see a 70 power tool come up all that often. That's the kind of power this guy has. And I do think, even though it's not necessarily always indicative, I like to see guys perform at lower levels, whether it be the minor leagues or anywhere. So when you talk about a guy who not only raked in the Pac-12, but also USA Baseball and the Cape Cod League, that's the best competition he can face at his age. And he's obliterating it. So so it is what it is. Everything we have about this guy is that he's a stud. So there's no reason for me to not believe he won't be a stud at the next level. So I think he's an absolute no-brainer number 1 for the Tigers to keep.
Yeah. So my number 2 was Casey Mize. He's the number 11 overall prospect in baseball right now. So I mean, that just speaks volume to the Tigers' potential that they have. They got the number 3 and the number 11. He's a bona fide ace. His command fell off his rookie year. He did not have a good rookie season, but again, it was the 2020. So, you kind of take it for what it was. But apparently this guy has got all the tangibles. He's got multiple pitches. He's got great command over it. Regardless of what we saw in 2020, they expect him to kind of reel it back in a little bit. And that's kind of like what his go-to is being able to control multiple pitches at a high velocity and a good spin rate. So this guy is supposed to be like the absolute stud of studs. One of the best pitching prospects in baseball right now, maybe other than like Forrest Whitley or something like that the Astros have. So I'm taking him as my number 2. He's supposed to be just this otherworldly stuff. Hope maybe he turns into what Verlander or Scherzer was for the Tigers a few years ago.
Yeah, Casey Mize, number 2 also. Again, a number 1 pick. So the number 1 overall pick in 2020 in Torkelson, the number 1 overall pick in 2018 in Mize. And baseball is a little bit different than, football, basketball, hockey, where you see the number 1 pick in the draft and they're expected to immediately produce as a rookie. Obviously, you still go through the minor leagues. That being said, number 1 picks in the draft in baseball work out far more often than even mid to late first rounders. Like, if there are any such thing as a can't miss draft pick, it's the number 1 guy in the draft. So he's another guy I have to take. I know he had an underwhelming debut in 2020, like you said, but I'm not going to freak out over a 7-start sample size when not only is the jump from the minors to MLB tough in a normal year, but to do it in 2020 with a limited spring training and preparation, I'm not going to freak out over that. He's got a 60 fastball, 60 slider, a 70 splitter. So he clearly has the stuff. I think it's just a matter of preparation at this point and just getting his feet under him. So Casey Mize is definitely another guy you got to keep.
Yeah, and what didn't really concern me about his bad 2020 is mostly the fact that it was his command that became the issue a lot. And, in college, he was one of the most accurate and commanding pitchers in college. So the fact that he lost that a little bit, historically speaking, he should get it back. So I'm not too worried about what we've seen. And it's like, oh, he came up immediately and failed. I'm not too worried about that because of what it was that was failing, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Right.
So my number 3, and I really don't have much to say about this guy other than one thing that I read about him. His name is Riley Green. And they said this guy has the hit gene. The hit gene. I don't know what that means. I'm assuming it just means that this guy is just they're saying he has this beautiful lefty swing. Maybe something that's like Cano, maybe it's something that's like Griffey. But when you say someone has the hit gene, number 3. That's lock that in for me.
Yeah, no, I have Green too. I don't know a ton about him. Again, going with another first-round pick. He was the 5th pick in the draft, 2019. Say he has a smooth lefty swing. This is like the most classic, eye test, anti-analytic statement ever I'm about to say. But I think there's something to be said for a guy who just has a visually appealing swing. Like, if you have a good swing and you're that young, I think that can help you immensely at the major league level. So lefty bat, they say he's a guy who has potential to hit for average and power. So I think if you put him in a lineup with Torkelson, that's something you could feel pretty good about. So I have Riley Green as my number 3 as well.
Yeah, hit gene was just something I couldn't overlook.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite scouting report things I've ever read.
Mm-hmm.
So that actually does it for the AL Central. One of the most boring, but like we said, interesting divisions, just based on the talent that's available. The White Sox were still definitely the toughest for me, just having to deal with that and having to not choose Louise Robert. But next up, look out for the AL West. We're gonna kind of break down everyone there, do a redraft with them. So just look out for that video.
Yeah, no, I think this was cool too because, like we said, as boring as the Central's been over the past decade, with a couple World Series appearances mixed in, look for a change in the guard. I think the Indians are going to trade a lot of those guys we talked about, see who they bring in. The White Sox are becoming one of the better teams in the American League. I think a lot of those young guys are going to have a huge impact on them in the next 5 to 10 years. And the Tigers, if those guys we just talked about translate into what the scouting reports are saying they could be, they're going to be a scary team again. So I think the Central's a division to look out for in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So look out for our AL West video coming out next. A little sneak peek into that one. Guess what? The Angels are going to be keeping Mike Trout. So
I actually don't have them keeping Mike Trout. No, I have them keeping Mike Trout.
this guy. What did you do?
All right, we'll see you guys later.